Hello, Dr. D. How are you doing today? And what would you like to discuss today?
Yeah, great, Kate. I'm doing great. I hope you are too. Happy Memorial Day, everyone. I think, obviously, given that this podcast is primarily about education and intellectual virtues, we would be remiss not to mention the tragedy that has occurred, that it happens in schools where perhaps there's some kind of a sense of uh, that among these deranged, typically young men, of course, that do this, that is the origin of their emotional distress. That whatever they went through, the kinds of peer pressures that they were exposed to, the kinds of gaps that were left in their lives, whatever kind of emotional lives they've been able to develop, they seem to blame the school system for what has happened to them, and they're taking their anger out on the schools. I mean, yes, we have copycat crime that happens, and I think in the last 3 days I've read about 2 or 3 other instances where the law enforcement has stepped in prior to some type of an attack on a school by young men. I just read about another one today. I believe it was on the East Coast, and another one a couple days ago here in Texas, where there's anger and there's some sense of that anger is being directed at schools, and I'm not sure why that is. I think we can speculate about that, and perhaps we should make that part of our discussion today. But clearly, there's something missing in the development of young males that is leaving them exposed to messages that guide them into this kind of behavior as expression of. Clearly, these are primordial emotions that are working here. When you see somebody that is behaving like that, we call it mental illness. Yes, perhaps that's an appropriate term, but there's also some deep and very compelling emotions that are driving them to go in and risk their own lives to commit these terrible acts. And so my research into the primordial emotions can certainly figure into our conversation today as well, and I'd love to address some of those issues and see if we can't through the process of conversation begin to help even ourselves understand what has occurred, and how it is that K-16 education, as we've been calling it, might be able to do a better job of crafting and supporting and creating individuals that are able to deal with this distress. And it seems like the distress needs an outlet. There's no question. Anytime you feel tension, you need some type of an outlet in your life. And unfortunately, for some people, this is seen as the solution to that extreme tension that they're feeling.
So let's start at the foundations. What has changed in K-16 over the last 30, 40 years that might be priming these conditions right now? So let's start kind of where we are, and then we can end with, our vision for how this can be resolved and be reduced in the future.
Right. And so I think a lot of it, and different people will have different perspectives on this. So I'll provide my perspective, and that's what podcasts are for people to go ahead and give their own perspectives on things. And I think is the fact that we've taken civics and values education out of the classroom and assume that somebody else is going to pick up the slack. And so people go through life, and there's no sense that we need to develop our own guardrails that keep us sort of aligned with culture as a whole. And I think many young people feel, in fact, that being part of a counterculture, in fact, is kind of a great way to express themselves and to demonstrate that they have an identity of their own. That wasn't something that was sort of willy-nilly adopted from the culture as a whole. And so, I think, it used to be that religion kind of played that role. And we had kind of a common cultural religion in the United States. Judeo-Christian religion was a big part of the founding of this country. And, over time, I certainly can understand how it is that religion has been supplanted in many ways by secular culture, and perhaps that can be something that we can certainly absorb as a culture. The secularization of culture is something that almost seems kind of natural now, that we've gotten away from deep beliefs in some kind of spiritual entity out there. And just given the fact that there's such a wide variety of spiritual choices that you could make, that perhaps that would suggest that maybe even one could choose to live without it, right? But certainly the fact that spirituality is such a big part of human life everywhere you look suggests that humans kind of need that. They need something to give them a sense of a greater purpose in life. I think our inability to replace the kinds of foundations and guardrails that have been provided by spirituality and commitment to some type of religious creeds has really left us bereft of some type of common culture. And I think that's a very dangerous place to be when you have so many people and so many different messages coming at these young people who have not developed the capacity yet, the intellectual virtues, if you will, to help weed through all these different messages and figure out which ones am I going to commit my life to and allow my life to evolve and unfold over time with the good and with the bad, and be resilient to these virtues. We just don't have anything, I think, that is consistent in our K-16 education. And before we went on today, we were talking about how the classics used to form sort of the fundamental part of a higher education. You would go and read the classics and learn about what the ancients thought about what it meant to live a good life. And today what we have is a negation of the classics, primarily because they were written by males, and generally speaking, white males. And I get that. I get that there's an issue with that, but let's not destroy what these individuals wrote, because during the time that they wrote, culture was such that they were the only ones allowed to do that kind of writing. Let's invite new constructive authors into that conversation, but let's not destroy the wisdom of the classics that have provided us with the guardrails that have given us the cultures that we have today, and the wonders that we have today, and the relative peace in the world that exists today is a result of people trying to understand how it is that human beings can live good lives.
At the same time that there's been the challenge of the humanities and teaching of ethics in the education system, there's been the new emergence of social media replacing that for people, right? We talked about last week a little bit of this conflict in that realm, and we know these young men that are on the periphery of feeling a sense of belonging often are targeted by extremist, voices, and if they don't have maybe the ethics of a culture, a classical wisdom to guide them, and then they only have this voice to guide them, how is that playing out? What's our role? Like, who's going to help resolve that moving forward? Because really these young men are probably just looking for virtues, guardrails, and a sense of belonging, right? A community.
Sure.
Somehow they don't get that right now.
Yeah, sure. And of course, everybody wants to belong. Everybody wants to be a part of a larger purpose, a part of a community, part of, loving, caring other human beings. I think the most emotionally, the events that have occurred in anybody's life that are remembered and cherished over time, and maybe even repeated through, storytelling and so on in family situations, are those where people felt the most sense of belonging and part of a loving and caring environment. And certainly we have a lot of pressures on families today, and families have been disrupted in many ways, especially at lower income levels. So from my perspective, what we need is a deeper understanding of what is the human condition. And so my research goes all the way back to the origin of life. I mean, so you look at the basic living things. The only reason that there's any kind of purposeful action in the world at all is because we have needs. Every human being has needs. Every living thing has a need. And that basic need is to fight the forces of entropy and gather and utilize the resources and energies that are given to us in the universe in order to continue to stay alive. Now, different types of species, including the human species, have developed unique kinds of needs that go beyond maybe just the basic life form, the single cell life form, right? But our higher order needs have been converted into wants primarily. So what do we want is a function of our culture, right? So the kinds of things that we want have to cohere with those basic needs that we have as living organisms. And so what we want, I think what we need, again, it's yes, of course, we get all these messages coming in from social media, but we need to be able to sift through those things. The one that is, certainly full of other people, opportunities to grow, to create long-term careers. Again, I think the teaching of resilience, for example, might be something that we've neglected, right? The ability to be resilient in the face of difficulties. And apparently but teaching the resilience in the face of that and helping people create their own personal identities that are positive and opportunistic, I think would go a long way to helping us not just sort of avoid some of these challenges, but to optimize the human resources of our society.
Great. So I think intellectual virtues, they can play a significant role in reshaping K-16 education. I'd like to hear from your perspective about what kind of support we can offer educators and what is being asked of them these days. Because no one's coming to them with the intellectual virtues curriculum. It's happening in such isolated pockets of academies, mostly in California right now. So, getting this message out there, supporting educators as they're being asked to do more and more post-pandemic, everything they're facing right now. Just like to hear your perspective as to what their lives are looking like these days.
Yeah, it's tough. And, and I'm glad you asked that question because I did have a chance during graduate school to work with aspiring teachers. I was part of the program, PhD program in education at the University of Minnesota. And I was a teaching assistant for a lot of courses that had aspiring teachers taking a variety of courses. And what I remember, and, at the University of Minnesota had, very good student population. And what I remember from the courses that I was a teaching assistant in is that many of these aspiring teachers were just interested in getting through the program and getting their grades and getting out into the field and becoming a teacher. And so what in the courses that I was involved in were more or less the courses that focused on why it is that you want to be a teacher. What is the philosophy of education that you are committing to? So I think a lot of teachers just kind of went through those courses without understanding that we really don't know how it is that human beings learn and optimize and flourish, that we are constantly struggling in the philosophy of education, in science of education generally, to understand how humans learn and how it is that they develop over a long period of time. And there are so many theories out there about human development, about the development of an organism over a long period of time, and a complex organism like human beings with nervous systems that are extremely plastic and can be influenced in many different ways by many different sources. And, what I observed amongst the aspiring K-12 teachers was that they weren't interested in how it is that human beings learn. They were more interested in just presenting things in the classroom that were standard kinds of things to present, the reading, writing, arithmetic kinds of things. But we don't understand in a more deep fashion how it is that human beings need to develop their entire emotional system. And so we ignore the emotional system and focus on the cognitive system, the cognitive part of development. And the emotional part is almost entirely neglected. And when you bring that up, people tend to think, well, that's the soft side of business, or that's the soft side of education. And there's nothing soft about emotion. In fact, emotion is the basic force that guides all living agents as they engage with the vast causal sea that we call the world. And without it, everything is meaningless. If there wasn't emotion at the core of everything we do, think about it. If all you had was this, like Spock, Mr. Spock from Star Trek, right? Remember how he was without any kind of emotion? That meant there's no reason to do anything unless we have some type of emotive force that is guiding us towards things that we value in the world. And that has been ignored. The emotional development of K-16 is ignored. And the way we deal with it typically, Kate, it's kind of funny. It's through these ancillary programs. Oh, you're having some type of a emotional problem? Well, go over there to that office it's an administrative office where they'll help, maybe get you a doctor or something, right? So immediately we think that anytime somebody has some type of an emotional challenge, that somehow or other they need some kind of separate professional intervention, right? Rather than making a core part of our K-16 education is to learn how to control these emotional urges, which are an innate part of what we are as living beings in this world.
Well, I have two things I want to jump in there with. I know it's not originally a Brene Brown quote, but I know that she recently brought it to light. She says, we like to think we are rational beings who occasionally have an emotion, but really we are emotional beings who on rare occasions think. And so I think that is very true. But when I was a kindergarten teacher, get this, Tom, this is the model. So kindergarten used to be, when I was there, even, not that long ago, we'd have naps and it was all about developing social emotional character, really, and learning how to get along, follow routines. Now, when I taught kindergarten, I was told that you teach an academic model for 3 years, because by the 3rd year, so when kids are in 2nd grade, they start to understand the concept. And my counter to that is they're not developmentally ready the 1st year or the 2nd year. It makes sense, but by the time they're 7, 8, they can handle the academic content that you're trying to get them to understand. That's the model, 3 years. So kindergarten is no longer about recess, play, negotiating other people's emotions and negotiating your emotions, relationships. It's about dumping content so that by the 3rd year, they might understand it. That to me is probably a pinpoint problem right there, like for all of this. In other countries, they simply don't do it. They don't do it. Finland, you don't go to school till you're 7 because you're not ready.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And it may be that some of our programs that we've developed, the pre-kindergarten programs, have become so academic that that young children don't get a chance to emotionally develop even before kindergarten anymore. And perhaps our best intentions have been misguided because we haven't tried to understand in a more deep way the emotional core of what we are as living beings. And I think that's all forgivable. And it's understandable, but research into what it is that we are as living beings has really progressed over the last couple of decades. And if you look at affective neuroscience, for example, which is a field of research that is part of my interdisciplinary crazy stuff that I do, right? Affective neuroscience by Jaak Panksepp. He's been working for decades to try to get people to recognize that the core of everything that we do, the most ancient part of our system, of our neural system, in fact, is the emotional motivational drivers that guide us into the world, that give us the sense of value in the world. And unless we begin to accept that the instruction book of any human life has to begin with an understanding of those basic emotional drivers, we are focusing only on the most recently evolved part of our brain, which is the neocortex, which is only there to help guide the emotional centers, which are the drivers of everything that we do. So until we bring that into our K-16 education as a fundamental part of what it is that teachers are exposed to when they are learning how to teach, that in fact there are these emotional drivers that form the basic core of every living agent on the planet. As a matter of fact, it's impossible to think of a living agent anywhere in the universe that does not have a basic emotional core that guides it to the resources that it needs to continue to fight the forces of entropy. It's impossible. So we can even speculate that if we found a living agent somewhere in the far recesses of the universe, it would at its very core be an emotional thing. And yet we have not been able to get our arms around that. Behaviorism and B.F. Skinner and that movement of most of the 20th century did provide us with some basic tools to understand learning at its highest levels, but it completely neglected the emotional core of every single living creature in the universe. And if you think about that, Kate, that's profound, that we can in fact speculate that if we discovered some living thing somewhere else in some far recesses of the universe, it may not think the way we do, but it would have to emote the way we do. There are 7 basic emotions that kind of form the sort of if you will, the operating system, the platform of all human beings. And the one that we need to focus on is what Panksepp calls seeking. And that is just a basic exploratory urge that every single human being has. And of course, we basically hammer that down and we say, look, you can't be that exuberant in the classroom because you've got to sit there and be quiet, right? And so we take the joy out of learning, and the exuberance out of that is natural to us. And I think our classrooms have to evolve. And I understand the need to regiment classrooms and have regimented kinds of learning, gradations and so on. But at the same time, we have to maintain that basic emotional desire to explore, which is there. And we can tap into that, and we can use that to help every human being optimize what it is that they're destined to become.
Well, I think I'd like to end on that note today. A bit of optimism for what's
optimism.
To come.
Yes, we're getting there. We're getting there. Hang on to the research. It's getting extremely interesting. And I think the coming years will see a lot of changes in education. I hope that we don't only focus on the highest level things as a result of these terrible tragedies that have occurred. Typically we go to gun control, or we talk about, arming teachers or these kinds of things, when it's about helping form better human beings. And we know how to do that. And we need to make sure that our K-16 educators are getting a philosophy of education, a background that enables them to appreciate how it is that they can be involved in crafting and helping shape human beings that are able to optimize their own destinies.
Thank you so much for your perspective on all this, Dr. D.